Hello, I'm Father Joe Gembala, pastor of St. Malachy, and welcome to our continuing series on the saints of Advent. Today's saint, St. John of the Cross, whose feast day is December 14th. John was a person born into what, basically we call poverty. His father worked very hard but died when John was only 3, and John had to be supported by other people, and he had a tough upbringing. Eventually, he was able to get an education because one of the local priests thought this young boy had some talent and tried to get him educated. He thought about joining the Jesuits, but didn't have enough education to become a Jesuit himself. So he decided to join a monastery. And back then, all monasteries followed some version of the rule of Saint Benedict, and the rule of Saint Benedict had a balance in life between work and prayer, and certain times for eating and sleeping. And there was a very rigorous schedule of prayer, including waking up at midnight every night for an hour of prayer, and then going back to bed, and waking up again at 3 for prayer, and then going back to bed. It's a very rigorous schedule to be a monk in that time. At the same time that John is in the monastery, there's a lady saint, Saint Teresa of Avila, who's doing the same thing in the city of Avila. Now, let me give you some historical background of Spain. This is the 1500s. We know that the conquistadors had brutally conquered the Indian empires in the Americas and sent boatloads of silver and jewels and other commodities back to Spain. So Spain suddenly became extremely wealthy. And the king of Spain at the time, with all this wealth, he was a very devout Catholic, decided to endow monasteries and convents and cathedrals and all kinds of works of the church. And one might say it was just too much of a good thing, because as this wealth pours into the monasteries and the convents, well, the monks and the nuns are thinking, well, why should we have to go out there and work the fields like we always have and clean the stables like we always have? We have enough money here to hire people to do this for us. We'll just devote our life to prayer. And of course, they cut back on some of their prayer times. No more midnight, 3 a.m, stuff like that. And of course, the food at the table is not simple bread and onion and cheese. There's much more exotic dishes, including fish imported from the coast. This is happening at this time. And St. Teresa and John of the Cross are just abhorred by this. They said, this is not how we're called to live. This wealth is going to ruin our spirituality. So St. Teresa and John got permission from the Pope to go about the monasteries and convents of Spain in order to get these people to go back to their original rule, the way they were supposed to do things, simple meals and hard work and getting up at midnight and praying. Needless to say, this was not very well received. John was in one room at one particular time in a monastery when the other monks decided to break in, grab him, arrest him, and lock him up. And they locked him up in this little room without hardly any light, and he had this little peephole that he's tried to read his breviary through the light there. And he was and they just gave him bread and some cheese, and that's all they gave him to eat, and some water, and he sat there for 8 months, and the monks just wanted to, put an end to this so-called reform movement. But John was clever. After 8 months, he figured out how to jimmy this tiny little window that the room had in the side, and he was able to pop it open. He was able to escape. And he got back to Avila, where his friend, St. Teresa of Avila, hid him in town, and until the authorities were told about what these monks had done to him. And then, of course, those monks were punished, and the reform movement continued. There was great hostility, and so the Pope's decision to solve the problem was that if certain monasteries would go back to the old rule, and the other monasteries could keep with a new rule that the Pope would subsequently approve. But his zeal for the prayer life and the simplicity of how to live it was well known at the time. during that period that he was locked up, he also contemplated existence with God alone, because he felt for that 8 months those monks had him locked up, he was alone with God. And he wrote some beautiful books about spirituality and encountering the Lord in the quietness of our lives.